Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuiki. Coming up.
Disinformation is infecting our media and digital landscapes, fueling hate and division.
Pacific reporters reflect on the state of the media. Also,
the vast majority of these deaths are preventable.
9 Pacific countries adopt a regional plan to save young lives. And we take a look at the upcoming sports matches for our Pacific teams. May 3rd is the day when the spotlight goes on journalists and media freedom around the world. And the reality is, journalists in many countries find it increasingly difficult to do their job, and the Pacific is no exception. Don Wiseman has more.
Disinformation is infecting our media and digital landscapes, fueling hate and division. And as climate change batters our fragile planet, the lives and livelihoods of future generations are under the gravest threat this world has ever known. This year, World Press Freedom Day centers on journalism in the face of the environmental crisis. I honor the journalists around the world who are working to hold polluters accountable for the damage and the devastation.
That's the United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk. He says when he thinks of the values of journalism, he thinks of trust, truth and integrity. The BBC says journalists are facing increasing pressure, including state interference, harassment and criminal charges, which are used to undermine their work. In the Pacific, it can also be difficult. The global civil society alliance Civicus has raised concerns about Papua New Guinea's failure to set up a human rights body, and moves that it says stifle the media and freedom of expression. Here's their researcher, Joseph Benedict.
We have serious concerns about the state of freedom of expression. We have documented reports of restrictions, harassment against the media and journalists, and the lack of protection for them. We are concerned about the ability of groups to organize protests and to hold them. There are still restrictions in the law.
The president of the Pacific Islands News Association says the role of journalism in addressing issues such as the environmental crisis is more critical than ever. Cora No says journalists serve as watchdogs, storytellers and advocates, but they're facing a crisis of their own. But he says threats to press freedom, censorship, harassment and attacks on media independence undermine their ability to fulfil their vital role in society. RNZ Pacific's PNG correspondent Scott Whitey says one of the biggest problems there is the loss of experienced journalists.
It's a struggle. There are two aspects to this. One is that younger journalists with very limited real-world experience are being forced into the management positions to fill in the void that's being left by seasoned journalists. And that is very risky for the industry because when they face intimidation, there's nobody to fall back on to get the guidance on how to deal with this kind of intimidation. So many just capitulate to this intimidation that happens. The other problem that I am seeing is that the lack of context, because as a journalist, when you're working in the media, the knowledge is gained incrementally over time. So that context is there if you spend considerable time in the media. But without that context and without that proper mentoring and without that backup, then it leaves the media very exposed to influences.
In Samoa, veteran journalist or Tangawai Tipi or Tangawaya says in the past year, the government has made it very difficult for reporters.
Lack of access and transparency. So I can understand, if I'm going to put myself in their seats, it's not easy to face the media, but that's the role of the media in any democratic country.
Samantha Magic is in Fiji with Islands Business and says a key feature there is that journalists are now working in a much more free environment since the Bainimarama years, and many are still learning to readjust.
There's a lot of rebuilding that has to happen. I think, perhaps in some quarters there's this expectation that suddenly things are going to be a lot more robust, and the reality is that there's been a couple of sort of generations of reporters who've operated in a certain context, and really we need to sort of rebuild their skills and confidence, and also, that's true certainly of the media, but also of the sources that we go to.
She says in the wider Pacific, journalists are being held back by a lack of resourcing.
Journalists in the islands know what the stories are. They know that there's big stories that need to be told, but resourcing them to be able to go out to remote areas to really spend their time on investigative work is always a challenge. I think just keeping our bright young reporters in the profession is another challenge. So there's a lot of competition for people with skills to go into communications and other fields. That's not unique to the islands, obviously, but we need to find ways to incentivize bright young reporters to stay in the profession and really grow in the profession.
Kalafi Moala has been a journalist in Tonga for 30 years. It says for Tonga, media freedom has emerged within that time span.
Because there was persecution, often prosecution, and a lot of police search that took place in the newsrooms. Today, it's different. We haven't had in the last 10 to 15 years anything that's significant as we experienced before. I think the issue today is really that there's very little opposition concerning press freedom from, say, government or from those in power. It's an issue that's really up to the individual journalists and the media owners. Because to me, the big challenge in Tonga is that advertising money can become the issue that tries to dictate whether there is press freedom or not. In other words, to us right now, the challenge is to be able to be free irrespective of how it affects those that advertise on their newspaper or website, how it affects those that actually own the media.
The Reporters Without Borders Media Freedom Report for 2024 has New Zealand at 19, Samoa at 22, Fiji at 44, Tonga at 45, and PNG is up to 91.
Children in 9 Pacific countries will now be better protected from life-threatening diseases because their governments are adopting an immunisation program that's been implemented by UNICEF in collaboration with the Ministries of Health and funding from Rotary since 2020. The commitment will see vaccines for 9 Pacific countries, including Vanuatu, Samoa, Tonga, Tuvalu, Cook Islands, Nauru, Niue, Tokelau and Kiribati. UNICEF Aotearoa spokesperson Francis Wells says this is a significant milestone given pneumonia and diarrhea are among the top 3 causes of death in Pacific children, particularly those under the age of 5. She spoke with Koroi Hawkins about the new commitments.
Yes, we now have 9 Pacific Island countries who are committing to roll out these vaccination programs, which will see vaccines for pneumococcal disease, rotavirus, and human papillomavirus added to the nation's national essential programs for immunisation.
Why is that significant and why hasn't it been in place before?
This is really significant because pneumonia and diarrhea are among the top 3 causes of death in Pacific Island children, particularly those under the age of 5. And so the vast majority of these deaths are preventable. Immunisation is one of the most cost-effective health interventions, and so we know that by committing to providing these vaccines, that more children will be able to survive and thrive and reach their full potential.
And the second part of my question was, why hasn't this been in place already? It sounds like such a common sense thing to be doing. What have been the challenges in the past?
I think the challenges in the past have been that Pacific Islands health systems are under-resourced. And also I would say that the Pacific Islands are a very challenging place to roll out vaccines. So we have a large number of islands across a broad geographic area, and it's logistically challenging to get vaccines to reach every child. But UNICEF globally immunises nearly half the world's children along with our partners. So we have the skills, the experience, the expertise to be able to roll out a program like this, which we know will save children's lives.
And obviously the things you mentioned, the problems with cold chains and all of that is pretty common knowledge in the region. But are these vaccines also expensive? I'm just thinking of the ability to purchase these vaccines for some of these countries.
UNICEF is able to purchase vaccines at scale because we immunise with our partners nearly half the world's children. So we're able to get the best possible price for these vaccines. And immunisation really is one of the most cost-effective health interventions. When you think of the cost of treating disease like pneumonia and diarrhea, it's actually much more cost-effective to invest in immunisation to prevent those diseases in the first place.
So when does this actually take effect? When will people on the ground in these countries start seeing these vaccines?
So vaccines are already being rolled out. So we're seeing families bring their children along and be vaccinated, and we know that these children will have a much better chance of reaching their 5th and their 10th and their 15th birthdays and growing up to be healthy and happy.
How long is this commitment for? Is this an ongoing, permanent program? Has it got a timeline on how long this project continues for?
So the Rotary give every child a future partnership. So the funds raised by Rotary in Australia and New Zealand are providing the vaccines for the first few years of the program. But now that the Pacific Island governments are adding these vaccines to their national essential programs for immunisation, this means that it's a sustainable program. So now that we have started rolling out the vaccines, children will be benefiting now and for years to come through this long-term health program.
During the pandemic, obviously vaccine uptake really dropped off all across the world, but particularly so in the Pacific. Have you seen any of that in your work in these countries? And is this a catch-up, so to speak, or a continuation of some of that work?
I would probably have to check with some of my programs colleagues in the Pacific. I do know that the system strengthening, the cold chain equipment that we purchased as part of this program, so for example the fridges and the infrastructure, actually helped with the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. So I know that by investing in the health systems overall, it benefits all kinds of vaccines.
It's another big weekend of rugby for the two Pacific teams in the Super Rugby Pacific competition. While Moana Pasifika plays for local fans in Nuku'alofa against the Highlanders on Saturday, the Fijian Drill will be out chasing a first away win in Canberra. Plus, the NFL will see more Pasifika players on its football fields. Eliasa Tora has more.
May is a significant period in Tonga's calendar as they celebrate Whakame, or Family Month, and on top of that, they will be hosting their first ever Super Rugby game at Te Whaiva Park on Saturday. Moana Pasifika's head coach, Fa'alongo Tana Umanga, says it's a special opportunity to be able to play in one of their home nations. He says they hope to get the result they want for their fans.
And it's about, creating good habits, good behaviours that create consistency. That's what I believe anyway. If we do things well consistently, we'll have consistent performances in the weekend. So, that's what we do. And then we just hopefully that we've done a good job on Friday night and close the book, and then we wait for Saturday and see what happens.
Fa'alongo says they will have to withstand the heat, which can pile on the pressure as well. The game is scheduled for 2 p.m. Tonga time.
Obviously, ways to battle the heat, just accept it. And it's, like I said, it's been cold in New Zealand. So, first and foremost, we knew it was going to be hot. That's no excuse. But for us, it's just making sure that we're able to execute under pressure. And sometimes the pressure's not the other team, it's the environment and the climate.
In Canberra, the Fijian Drua will be gunning to claim their first away win. But head coach Mick Burns says it will be a tough battle.
Home advantage is a big thing in Super Rugby, and Canberra's a good advantage for the Brumbies. They play well there, and this Saturday night we need to make sure we're ready for the physicality that the Brumbies bring. Now, we know that they're going to be strong at the breakdown.
Burns says a win is needed to keep their dreams of playing in the finals alive.
Well, every win's important at any stage, but when you're in the 8, you've got to keep winning. And then if you do that, then your future's in your hands. You're not relying on someone else to beat someone else to get into the 8.
Meanwhile, the signing of 13 Pasifika recruits in the American football's NFL competition is a big plus.
Fernando Mendoza hit from the blind side. The ball pops free, and Utah jumps on it.
Former NFL star Manasseh Chesesapolu says it's great news as he confirms the signings.
Well, it feels good because when I came into the league in the early 80s, 83 was my first year, there were 4 of us, Pacific Islanders, in professional American football. This year by itself, just 13 that got drafted.
And in our next sports wrap, Eliesa will provide all the results and a breakdown of all the sports teams' performances. That's Pacific Waves for today. To listen back, head over to rnzi.com/programs. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, till 4.